But let me introduce you to a man by the name of Robert Small. Now, this guy right here should make you look at the stories they've told us and think, two and two are not adding up to make four. This man was an American politician, publisher, businessman, a maritime pilot, born into slavery in, how do you pronounce that? Bedford, South Carolina. He freed himself, his crew, and their families during the American Civil War by commandeering a Confederate transport ship. Now, with transport, right? You look that word up because what is it? Transport means to move prisoners. CSS Planter. That's a farmer, a person, a manager, someone that owns property. We'll look it up, I think. Yeah. In Charleston Harbor on May 13, 1862, in sailing it from Confederate-controlled waters of the harbor to the U.S. blockade that surrounded it. He then piloted the ship to the Union-controlled enclave in Belfort, Port Royal, Hilton Head area, where it became a Union warship. Of course, this convinced President Abraham Lincoln to accept African American sailors into the U.S. Army. Now, that's what I found interesting. Because are we talking about his crew? Or are we talking about him specifically? Because one man, I would think, wouldn't be enough to convince them, that you can join the army. But if you have your crew, and your crew are the Africans, and they've worked their butt off for their freedom under this man's leadership, then that would be what would trigger the approval to have them join. Because I'm thinking about Abraham Lincoln, right? Because he didn't talk about what's the African American problem. He talked about his quote was about the black and white problem, right? I would free the whites if it meant that the Union would be saved, or I would free the blacks if it meant the Union would be saved. He said something of that sort. He didn't say Africans. And here they use African Americans. So I just find that to be interesting. But here was a man that was a slave that was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for South Carolina, 7th District. How did a slave end up doing that? I mean, wasn't the whole idea that you couldn't read, you couldn't write, there was a punishment for being educated? How did you end up in a position to be the representative for South Carolina? Let's see here. After the Civil War, he returned to, forgive me if I'm not saying that right, but Belfort, and became a politician, winning elections as a Republican to the South Carolina legislator. Now you gotta ask yourself, okay, this is South Carolina. This is South Carolina. Right there next to Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, North Carolina. These places that we're told, Jim Crow, black Christian codes are all enacted. How did he win a seat as a Republican legislator? What white folks were voting for him in the same town he was just a slave in? Think about that. You grew up a slave in this town. You just fled this town. You stole, you stole a Confederate ship. Wouldn't these people want to string him up and hang him? But no, they turn around and vote for him to be their state representative. Who was voting for him? In the United States House of Representatives during the Reconstruction era. Reconstruction? Really? With all the riots going on, you were voting him in. With all the Tennessee, right? You got 24 hours to leave, to leave your seat in office, black man. Or if you're here the next day, we'll kill you. But yeah, you're saying this guy can run in South Carolina and where the Civil War supposedly began, or the second Civil War, because remember the original one starts in Kansas. The original Civil War started with Kansas, with the Jayhawks. But their version of the official one starts here in South Carolina. Their meaning the United States, the way they want to tell it. Oh, Smalls authorized state legislations approving, providing for South Carolina to have the first free and compulsory public school system in the United States. He founded the Republican Party of South Carolina. Do you hear all these things a former slave was doing? How? Who went along with this? How did he have the knowledge and the training to do all this? I'm just saying, like, you got to think about that. Robert Small was born in 1839 to Mrs. Polite, a woman enslaved by Henry McKee. She gave birth to him in a cabin behind McKee's house at 511 Prince Street. Now that's an interesting name for a street. And Prince, that is, which Prince? In Belfort, South Carolina. He grew up in the city under the influence of the Low Country Gala culture of his mother. Ooh. The other article I read didn't have that in there. My mind is, I'm trying to get it straight because I want to say people have commented in the past about the gala. The way gala is spelled, is that Arabic? It's like Arabic. Gala. Anyways, I'm getting, oh man, of his mother. His mother lived as a servant in the house, but grew up in the fields. Robert was favored over other enslaved people, so his mother worried that he might grow up not understanding the plight of enslaved field workers. She and asked for him to be made to work in the fields and witness the whippings. Now, hold on. I want you. Now, here's American Battlefield Trust. Now, here's this one. It says, Robert Small was born into slavery in Belfort, South Carolina on April 5th, 1839. His mother, Polite, was a slave owned by Henry McKiss, who may have been Small's father. Robert's mother had grown up in the fields, and while he now worked in the house with her, she feared Robert would grow up without knowing the plight of the slaves forced to work in the fields on the plantation. She showed him the full horrors of slavery, making him witness the whippings of the field hands, which were a frequent occurrence. After seeing the brutality of slavery, Robert grew defiant and frequently found himself in the Belfort jail. Now, you got to ask yourself, as a slave boy, does that make any sense? After they shown you, and tried to illustrate how brutal things were and how harsh things were, just repeatedly just throwing him in jail, that makes sense during that time? That doesn't make sense to me. His mother feared for his safety, so she arranged with Mr. McKee to send Robert to Charleston, where he would work as a laborer at the age of 12. Small made $1 a week, with the rest of his wages sent back to his master. And back here, they just talk about the wages, how he became a longshoreman, a sail maker, and eventually worked his way up to become a wheelman, more or less a helmsman. Although slaves were not permitted the title. As a result, he was very knowledgeable about the Charleston harbor. And then they talk about his marriage to his wife. That was the other part I thought was interesting, because you often try to find out how much it costs for them to free themselves, and nobody really says it, or will give it to you. Robert aimed to pay for their freedom by purchasing them outright, but the price was steep: $800, equivalent to $23,042 dollars in 2020. He had managed to save up only $100. It could take decades for him to reach $800. So there. Now, how did they come up with that price, right? The $800 would be the price for freedom. And this they go on to explain, the whole way that they got through. Where was the part about the straw hat? There was their custom. All afterwards, the 3 Confederate ships were court-martialed, and 2 convicted, but no, that's not what I'm looking for. That's where his wife agrees, and everyone else is freaking out. He sailed. Wife and children. The crewman. Here it is. Small guided the ship past the 5 Confederate harbor forts without incident, as he gave the correct signals at the checkpoints. The planter had been commanded by a Captain Charles C.J. Rila, however you pronounce that guy's name, and Small copied Rila's manners and in straw hat on deck to fool Confederate onlookers from the shore and the forts. The planter sailed past Fort Sumner at about 4:30 a.m. Now I'm just imagining a ship sailing through the harbor, at this time, and all they see is a straw hat, and that's enough for them to say, "Oh yeah, hey, we don't see the skin from the the wheelmen. We don't see this. You don't see nothing. No skin or nothing to show you. You know that this is the normal dude. We just see a straw hat and we say, hey, that's enough. That's enough. Good on you, mate. Keep going. Oh man, this is great. And I just want to get to this last part about the mob because there's another part where I thought it was interesting. And he's gonna let's see. He was asked to go to was it Libya and all this place. Where's the part about the mob? To enter the service of the Freedmen's Bureau. I wonder what. That's not what I'm looking for. Well, I don't think I'm gonna be able to find it, but there's a part where he stops a mob from trying to hang, and I'm like, how could this dude, this dude that first black owner, he's a what does it say there? Charleston's black elite. He's a member of the Charleston Black Elite. We should look into that too, because that's something else that caught my eye. Small owned and helped publish a black owned newspaper. And famous and with the Calvin. All right, well, I don't think I'm going to find it. I just thought it was interesting the way he stood up to the sheriff and the mayor of the town to get them to stop hanging. I'm like, yeah, what kind of authority do you have to be able to do that? You know. But anyways, though, I mean, if you sit back and read this, I think there's enough here to make you realize that oh, here it is. Although Small was not officially involved with politics on the local level, he had some influence in 1913. In one of his final acts as a community leader, he played an important role in stopping a lynch mob from killing two black suspects in the murder of a white man. He pressured the mayor, saying that blacks he had sent throughout the city would burn the town down if the mob was not stopped. The mayor and the sheriff stopped the mob. So I just thought that stuff was interesting. And like I said, just listening to this and reading this now, it should make you think you can't have it both ways. You can't have all this freedom to do all these things, but you're also the slave. And then you got to rethink what kind of slavery was going on that you could do all this stuff and move. I mean, just the way he moved, and what kind of education did you have as a slave where you could run for office and be successful? I'm just saying, it's not the picture they've always painted.